Welcome to another episode of Boots on the Ground, where we discuss Israel's war, politics, and identity. Today, I'm joined by Aron Schoenfeld, who made his way to Israel from America after first being an American Jew and then a Zionist, now an Israeli. He finally made his way into the uniform later in life. He's going to tell us all about the story of how he got from growing up in New York to wearing an Israeli uniform. He's the founder of Smiles for the Kids, an amazing organization that helped the families of reservists and their children throughout this war. But before we get into the episode, I want to say thank you to our partners here at the Jerusalem Media Group and our sponsors at BeThereIsrael.com. For all your video production needs from any event that your family, your friends, and your audience can't be at live in Israel, BeThereIsrael.com provides live streaming services for any event and for all occasions. Now let's get to the show. Aron, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so what is Smiles for Kids? Let's talk about that, and then we'll find out how we got there.
Yeah, so just to give you a quick background on Smiles for the Kids, and I moved here, like you mentioned, originally from New York, then Florida, moved here during Corona in summer of 2020, and life goes on. Corona, a couple mini wars, but mini wars, I don't know what to call it here, but there's always something going on in Israel. And obviously October 7th happened and war broke out. And, I always say, thank God it was the second day of Chag in America because no one was bothering you the first day. But by the time they all got online, they all just realized what happened and wanted to help. So friends of mine from Boca, Gil Bloom, who works very closely with Glenn Golish from the Helping Israel Fund, people just started sending me money and saying, hey, do something, help people in Israel. And just really, I was new to the country, wasn't a soldier, living in Modi'in where things were pretty quiet, and I really didn't know what to do, and I kind of hoarded the money for like a week or two. And at the end of that, I'm like, okay, I got to do something. And someone said, well, hey, this family across the street, they have three kids that are all in different places, one in Yehuda Shomron, one in Gaza, one up north. Each was one of the first two guys in from the unit, from a combat unit, and they were struggling. And at the same time, a restaurant from Efrat emailed saying, hey, we lost all our parties. We need help. Can anyone buy food from us? So I bought deli platters and food, and I brought it over to these families for dinner. And just with the note, to this family, I said, hey, people in Florida are thinking about you. And they posted online and they thanked us and they thanked the people in Florida, and someone saw it and was like, wait, hey, can you do something for us? And someone sent us a list of 80 families from Modi'in that the husband was in the war at this point for 3 weeks or so. And I called the people in Boca and Glen and, hey, can you send some more money? And they sent, and we made candy platters. And the first, we took this list, and I'm with my son, who at the time was, I think, 10, Elliot, and he comes with me, and we just go to a random door in Modi'in, right near the mall, and we're holding a candy platter to bring them for Shabbos with a note, and we knock on the door, and the first thing you hear through the window is this little boy saying, is Abba home? And we're like, oh, it's heart-wrenching, and your heart literally just drops out of you, even though you're there to do something good. And the mom's like, looks out and she's like, no, it's just a neighbor checking on us, and give them this candy platter. And the kid saw the candy, his eyes lit up, and he just took the platter, ran with it before the mom could even do it. She said, thank you, who are you, whatever. Like, just some guys from Boca wanted to, show their appreciation. Obviously what you're going through is tough, but for that 30-second period from when the kid took the candy to on the table, probably till he finished it, really quickly, it did not make it till Shabbos. You saw the kid didn't think about anything else. And kind of after that, we're sitting there like, okay, we delivered the rest of the platters that we made. And we're like, okay, how do we do more? And someone reached out with a not-for-profit saying, hey, people were posting pictures about this. Could you put it under our Amutah so you could do a tax deductible? And once we did that and we told people in America, like, wait, it's tax deductible and a donor advised fund and this and that, and people started sending money, and it just, grew and grew. And as people saw the pictures of what we were doing, from dinners to candy platters to small, bringing bounce houses to people and all these different things, it just grew and grew. And, we can get into many more details, but we've raised over $1.5 million so far, and spent probably a little more than that as well, just helping the families of soldiers and eventually soldiers as well.
Wow. So it sounds like that when you founded Smiles for the Kids, Smiles for the Kids, you you saw a need. You saw a need in the community. That, soldiers went off to war. This wasn't just another, like you call, short wars that we've had where, me and reservists, we would disappear for a day or two or a week at a time. It was fairly obvious from the beginning that this was going to be months long. And families, wives and children weren't prepared for that. There was no reality where your father or your husband just disappears for 3 months and doesn't come back, and there's a hole left in the family. It's not just a technical and logistical gap. There's an emotional gap that's filled there, and you saw this need, and you just jumped in to fill it. You didn't wait for the government to come in. You didn't wait to have some sort of money. You saw a need. That's it. I'm going to fix this problem and deal with it. That is not an awareness that comes like overnight. That's something that's from inside of you. Where where did your life take you before that? What was growing up like? Where did that ideology, where did that awareness of the needs of your fellow brothers come from? So that we can help, learn from that and teach our children and help raise our communities that they instill those values in the next generation.
I mean, at the risk of sounding cliche, it starts in the home, where you grew up. But really, my parents were always involved in various causes. From an early age, I remember Yechiel Leiter, who's the ambassador now, sleeping at our house every time he came to speak about One Israel Fund when he was their director. My parents had donated playgrounds in Sderot and different communities. That's their Gush Katif, actually, which part of their deal was that it was taken down before it was given back. But my parents were always involved in this, whether it was Soviet Jewry rallies that I remember going to as a little kid. There was always a sense of activism. My high school as well, I went to Rambam for high school, and the principal believed in action. And one of the big things that we did was, as a school, we partnered with the Simon Wiesenthal Center. And we used to go rally against Nazis that they found that were living in the U.S. Now, going back as a high school kid, you're like, great, I get to miss like a week of class just to make signs to hold at a rally. I remember coming up with slogans, and we're sitting in the lab coloring signs and, to use at the rally. But we went to Philadelphia, we went to Boston. I remember one of them, Alexandrius Lalaikis was his name. And they found that he was a war criminal living there, and we protested outside his house. We were interviewed for the news as sophomores in high school, and we had our talking points, but we ended up getting him deported. And even though this guy was 90 years old at the time, he came in, to the U.S. falsely. But there was always that sense of activism and doing things. And that always, kind of went with me. Boca also, I moved to Boca after New York. It was a community of people that are extremely Zionistic and are doers, and they really want to do. The problem with Boca is it's too nice, so sometimes it's too hard to move to Israel. But at the end of the day, it really is an active community. So, the communities that I grew up in, the schools that I went to, I remember even picking schools for my kids, and, some schools a little more to the right, a little more to the left. But the central question that my wife and I always asked ourselves was, do they celebrate Yom HaAtzmaut? Do they say Hallel? Do they actually bring donuts? And that sense of Israel, even though before we made Aliyah, we had no intention of making Aliyah, but Israel was always very near and dear to us. It was a place we wanted to go and visit when we can. It was just, something central to both our households. My wife's father, Alav Hashalom, he came during one of the wars, I think the Yom Kippur War, and volunteered. Just whatever he could do. And it's just instilled in both myself and my wife, which thank God, because to just drop everything and run a not-for-profit and have no salary for a while, you need your wife's support. But, thank God it all worked out.
So we understand, where the ideals come from, and we see that beginnings of how Smiles for the Kids started. But what are some of the other things that Smiles for the Kids has done as an organization to share that love and support for the families of soldiers, for the families of reservists, for the reservists themselves? What are some of the activities you guys have planned and do, and what do you still do today now that the war, we all here have a sense the war is winding down? What's next for the organization?
So one of the things that we did specifically with the name is, my background's in marketing and I work in marketing. And, when I was coming up with this, I was like, hey, wait, everyone's doing, this for Israel, this for Israel. And I specifically didn't put the name Israel in it for various reasons. But, one of the reasons for that is I want it to become something that can potentially be more than Israel. And we've done stuff for the fire relief in California, and for other situations, we've been able to send things and help with those. So that's on one side, outside of Israel. Mm-hmm. On the Israel side, we also didn't do anything war related in the name. And Smiles for Kids is a little generic, but the whole point was that it doesn't necessarily need to be, your husband's in the army, so we're going to react and do something for you. We wanted it to be a little broader. And with that, we helped the displaced families, getting them supplies, bringing stuff to their hotels, different activities, carnivals, flower making workshops, paint workshops. Some of them are therapeutic, some of them are just fun. We went down to the kibbutzim down by Gaza, and we did a lot of events for them, when they had gone out to the hotels, when they were displaced, but also we came back to them when they were coming back to their kibbutz and did a welcome home party. For instance, Kfar Maimon, the week that they came, we made a big carnival together with MTA, the high school from America that was here, because we don't want to just, we're not a sadness organization. Oh, you're going through a tough time, here's something, but we want to celebrate the good times with you too. So help them, the therapeutic part of it, of going back to someplace that has bad memories and helping change those into positive memories. We've done a lot of bar and bat mitzvah projects where we partner, people from America will help sponsor a bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah here. We've done them for soldiers that are injured, severely injured, and their family trip got canceled, so they had to make a small bat mitzvah program. One, for instance, where the chayal was still in intense therapy in the hospital, and they let him out for like 2 days just to partake in the bat mitzvah, and we put that together. But the next phase now is therapeutic. For husbands and wives. The husband's been away for, I know you have, 600 something days.
No, I'm not at 600 yet, but
whatever. 400 days, 500 days over 2 years. You kind of miss your kids growing up. Your wife and you're on October 8th and she's on whatever the day, it is today. How do we give you money or a certificate to go to dinner and send a babysitter to your house? Give you and your wife time to connect. It doesn't sound like much, like, oh yeah, you're sending someone for dinner, but it's a form of therapy, letting people bond and reconnect. Families that need time with their kids, right? We're sending them somewhere, bringing an activity to their house for them and their family, because as you know, and I've seen it, some kids were barely walking when their father left, and they come back and they're speaking full sentences.
yeah.
So you've really lost. There's a huge gap, and you have to really make up that time. So those are the things we're working on. We're working on as much of it, trying to implement therapeutic sides to it as well. You're working with communities that not just are experiencing it now, but have experienced it, where, so just because the husbands aren't in the army right now doesn't mean that there's no trauma. So we're still bringing events like that to the communities. We're doing Hanukkah parties this year, and the goal is to keep working and building programs. And as we get to know families and see who needs it more, we can tailor it to them specifically as well. So unfortunately, I think that part of this war is very not talked about yet because we're not there, but that's going to be a longer war than the actual war was.
Also, people forget when they talk about PTSD that P stands for post. And for most of us, that it's still ongoing. We're not after yet. The trauma is still happening. I personally, one of the things I like the most is you're not focusing on trauma as a bad thing. I think there's the underspoken part about PTSD is that there's also, I don't know the exact psychological terms of when people thrive from trauma, is that people succeed. Like personally, I don't feel that the trauma from this war has been a negative thing. This podcast is one example of something that's come out of it in my personal life. People thrive in trauma too. And it sounds like that your organization is focusing on supporting the good, bringing the smile to a kid, but it's not just the child, it's the whole family, but helping support the positive side along with it. That speaks a lot to me.
Yeah.
But one thing that about you though is that besides moving to Israel, and of course living here isn't just enough. When you make it here, you have a motivation you then create an organization that helps support people, but you then made the humongous step of joining the army at 44. Sorry, didn't want to. 44 years old and putting on a uniform for the first time. That blows my mind away. I'm no one's expecting to be, Rambo and, Superman here, but just the idea of putting on a uniform and doing any form of basic training at this point in my life is probably the least appealing thing I could ever think of doing right now. Talk me through how that started, what that was like, before you get into what it was like, but how did your wife react to that, was it an easy process? You went through you went through what's called Shlav Bet, which is like the
Yeah.
second stage, which is still an easier version of basic training for people who are in their older years.
Yes.
Not geriatric just yet, but in army terms, we're both getting there.
Yes.
What was that like? Where did that come from?
Well, I'll tell you, just before I get into the whole story, you say this, when I told my family I'm joining the army, their response wasn't like, "Oh, I'm worried about you going into Gaza or Lebanon." They're like, "You might die during training." Like you haven't done this stuff, and I'm like, okay, well, guess if I can get through training, I can get through anything. But really, this whole thing kind of, you move to Israel as a 40-year-old or 39 years old when I moved here, and you move to a community where I live in Buchman and Modi'in, and there's a lot of Anglos. One of the advantages, or I think it's an advantage, is moving during Corona. And people are like, you moved during Corona, it was crazy. But one of the nice things was that we had street minyanim, and you could only really talk to your neighbors because you couldn't go more than 100 meters and all that. And I met a lot of guys on our street, Israelis, that I probably otherwise wouldn't have ever talked to or met. And when wars go on and different things go on, whether it's rockets from Gaza, threats from Iran or that, the Israelis kind of congregate over here and the Americans congregate over
Right.
here. We sit here like, oh my God, when's the next alert? We have to shut our bomb shelter. And the Israelis are talking, oh, our unit's doing this, or maybe I'll help my unit with that. And there's a disconnect. And, a lot of people, you move here, and the main reason most people move to Israel, you're getting away from America, but you're moving here for your kids because you see what you have, and you're like, I think we need to live in Israel, for whether it's a Zionistic reason, a business reason, whatever. There's some connection, and you're giving that to your children and making them the Israelis in essence, because they're the ones that do Sheirut. They're the ones that go to the army. You're making a really strong decision for those kids and putting them in a situation that's not so easy. And yes, they will be more acclimated than I am, but I just felt that divide. And really, especially when the war broke out, that there was a clear line when all these men from my community are running to the army, and older guys in their 60s, 70s are going to volunteer and do stuff with computers and intelligence, and I'm helpless. And Modi'in got very few rockets, so sometimes you felt like nothing was going on. And through the work I was doing with Smiles for the Kids, I saw what was going on, and I kept hearing from families, I wish my husband was home just for one weekend a month, or he could come home a little more so I could help the kids, or extra day. Fine. And it didn't process in my mind, but it was in my head. Midway through the war, also, my daughter turned 16, and she started the whole process. Do I do Sheirut Leumi? Do I do Army? And based on all these conversations with people, I was talking to her about the different options, and she's like, well, I don't want to do combat anyhow, so what does it matter? And I'm like, wait, I'm talking to all these people, and they're like, my husband's just standing guarding a gate, the gate on Shabbos for a base. He's not really doing anything crazy, but he can't come home because no one else is guarding the base. Right. And I'm like, okay, wait, how can I tell my daughter that they need bodies and they need people? It's not just about people in Gaza, in Lebanon. And then I have the opportunity through this program, Shlav Bet, that someone told me about, where people that had missed the cutoff for the army can now go and join the army and be these people that provide shmirot and, guard duty for the base, or logistics support, or intelligence. I couldn't in good conscience, kind of balance the two, saying, hey, they could really use you. And then at the same time, I'm here saying, no, I won't do that. It's not for me. And, I applied through this program, and once it started going in the beginning, it was a little slow, and we're waiting for paperwork, and it's typical government bureaucracy. But you keep calling to get my paperwork. Some days they do, some days they don't. Some days you send it again. Depends who was on the phone.
Did you have to fax anything?
No, but
okay, that's already a step up.
But it's it was a process. But really, what clicked for me was when they actually ran the first training program for it, and I didn't get called. I was like, hey, what's going on? Now this is real, and I have a real chance. It's not like a theoretical. So then I started really pushing, and I had people pushing for me. Probably so this was already, it started in October of 2024 when I started the process. Come August, Ugda Tishim V'Tesha, the 99th Division or Brigade, whatever it is, Division, they basically took over the program and said, hey, look, we have a WhatsApp group with 300 people that want to join the army, and you guys can't process them. we'll take them. We'll do it. Let us do everything. We'll take them and we'll train them. And they basically worked out the whole system. I got a call a Wednesday night at 8 o'clock. Hey, tomorrow morning, be there for your Tzav Rishon. Went in Thursday morning. Great. Answered all my questions. Okay.
For those who don't know, Tzav
Uh,
Rishon, for our listeners who don't know, Tzav Rishon is your first like call up notice. You go to an army base and they ask you 4 billion questions. You do a simple physical, a
yeah.
psychological exam, a small Hebrew test. It's just the first. Let's get to know each other and see how we can use you test.
Yeah, and
For the army.
to that point when you say the mental test, it's pretty basic for me at this point because the division already basically made their list of who they're taking. So you get up there for the mental test, and the woman looks at me and she goes, "So are you of like sound mental capacity?" And I'm like, "Other than being 44 years old and trying to join the army for the first time, I'm perfectly fine." And got through that. And usually 16-year-olds have a year to prepare for that, or half a year. But we just jumped right in. And then as I'm leaving, like, okay, good. Sunday morning, you report you're drafting Sunday. So really no time for anything. And that process was great because my wife drops me off. All the adults are there with their younger kids and giving them the blessings before you go into the army. And my wife's like, bye, I'll see you in 2 weeks, don't die, and then you going in with all these kids, and my friend's daughter actually drafted the same day. So when we got to the base where they give you your uniform and you do your dental records and all that, and you're going through the whole process, because we were on our own, I just walked around on my own and did my own thing. They let me have my phone because they're like, oh, you probably have a family you need to call. It was very like laid back for us. And I'm watching my friend's daughter go through this regimented process. I'm sending her parents pictures, and we're just like laughing like she's 17, I'm 44, and we have identical experiences. But we did 2 weeks of basic training and came home for Shabbos, and it was intense. As you said before, it's a modified version. But they basically say, okay, we don't need to knock the 18-year-old attitude out of you, so we're just going to train you. Because it was the 99th Division and they knew that they were going by Gaza, it was a lot more intense than previous Shlav Bet trainings. There was a lot more shooting. We had a full day, morning till night. I even had to hike back in the dark. We did a couple other days of shooting, a lot of hiking, a lot of first aid, first responder stuff, the hikes with the stretcher, all the good fun stuff. But we made it through. But again, with the Army, we learned you never know anything until they tell you last minute. And the last day we were there, they surprised us with, oh, by the way, it's Thursday, you're going home. Sunday, you have to report to the base, and we're going down to Gaza. So no one had time to prepare. Wives had no idea. Families didn't know what was going on, and it was kind of stressful. But my wife was fine with it, thank God. And my kids are older, so it wasn't as stressful as some of the people with 3 months olds at home. But went there and ended up on a base 50 meters from the Gaza border, right by the entrance by the Nitzerim corridor, and spent about 3 months there, back and forth, and in and out of Gaza, guarding the base, and really everyone was broken up into different logistical roles, but all these quote unquote secondary roles. But we also learned for every combat soldier, there's about 8 people behind them, keeping the supply chain. So it was incredible experience. Never thought I would go into Gaza. Never thought I'd be in the army, but I wouldn't trade that for the world.
And during those 3 months, when you'd go down, how many days would you go down to like Gaza at any given time? You'd be there a week, 2 weeks before
So
you
it
came home.
was our unit was week, so it was like 6, 7 days. Sorry, I had to get that in for my daughter, but yeah, we were there really like 6, 7 days at a time. One time I experienced my real army experience the day of the ceasefire during Sukkot.
Hmm.
We were driving from our house in Modi'in to meet friends from Boca. 50 people. They rent a bus every year. We go on a full day tour, and we're on the way driving, and we're about 30 minutes out. Get an urgent message. Everyone from your unit, please call this number in 10 minutes for a group call. Okay, call. Okay, ceasefire today. That means Hamas is going to try something. Everyone must be within 3 hours of getting all their equipment, being dressed, and on base. Okay. Drive the rest of the way, see everyone, say hi, bye, go home. Get home. Aaron, please come down to base. So, you just like you learn that you're even though it's week on, week off, as long as you're in the army, you belong to the army. Even now, I tell my wife, like, if something happens somewhere, we're always just a phone call away from being called in. So kind of, I know other soldiers, you have all your gear together. I've got my bag with my basic stuff that, if I need to go, I go. And,
It's a different headspace. I think people have always asked, you've now experienced it, and I've tried explaining it in the past, that there's a consciousness of being in the service, even when you're not. Like even right now, like you said, they can call your unit up right now if the 99th Division needs the extra manpower for logistics. If they're gearing up for whatever operation, they need more logistics. You guys are literally just a phone call away. So reservists like myself, we experienced that for 20 plus years, where anytime something hits the news, we'd be like, oh, there's more rockets being fired in a given day. For the next couple of days, we're walking around until, is my phone going to ring now that they're calling us up to deal with it, or are they going to call the other brigade up to deal with it? Like that was always the phone. It's a consciousness that very few people ever experience, and the ones that do it, it affects the entire way you look at the world. I'm happy you've experienced that now, because it's not a burden, it's a privilege.
It's a privilege. It's stressful. And I will say there was 1 week after, I think when I was in America after the service, when I finished my Miluim, I was in America and I turned to my sibling who I was with and I'm like, I think this is the first Shabbos since the war broke out. I didn't have a cell phone on me. Whether it was from rocket fire potential or being in the army and the call ups, like it was the first time, and it's a really weird feeling. Like, there's the waiting for the alerts, which is always stressful, but then there's that next level of if one bullet goes the wrong way, you're all have to be there in an hour. That's a really weird mentality.
So as I was trying to explain to you, also that's why for a lot of Israelis, the only time you're ever on vacation is when you're outside Israel. There's no, like I'm going down to Eilat with my family soon on a vacation, and at the end of the day, I'm still only a few hour drive away from my emergency call-up depot. Like my equipment will be in the car with me in the end of the day, because you're only just a phone call away. That's why real vacation is the only time you go abroad. People want to understand why Israelis always want to go abroad. It's because once I'm abroad, all of a sudden I have to get on a plane. It's not, you can't just call me up right away. There's a process. But I want to ask, what was, after your 3 months in uniform, and now you're going to continue doing reserve duty, what is your biggest takeaway? What was the biggest thing that you learned? What was the most, I don't know, backwards, what you thought was blue and you found out is white, what you thought was one, you found out is two? What was the most opposite thing that you learned about the Army by being in it and serving in it? And what was your biggest takeaway from those 3 months?
Loaded question. But at the risk of getting me in trouble with the powers that be in the Army,
No names.
no names. No, it's no one in particular. I think that Israel, everyone jokes about the bureaucracy in Israel. The Army is like multiplied times 10.
Oh, yeah.
I've got stories. Guys, their truck broke down in Gaza. It took about 6 hours to get permission to go get them. A bunch of guys just sitting there with a little bottle of water and their guns in the middle of Gaza. Why? Because this unit wants to, they won't get permission. They're going there. And we're sitting there watching this like in real time, trying to get our friends out, and like just this bureaucracy. But despite the bureaucracy, it's the soldiers are the reason we're winning the war. And that was something I really learned, that you're given your orders, and in typical Israeli mentality, it's like, so they said go that way and stop there. Maybe they meant stop over there, and you go a little further and you do a little more. That the soldiers there's no egos in it. Yes, there's politics within the divisions and the army and who gets credit for what. But at the end of the day, when push comes to shove, we're all brothers and we're all looking out for each other. And you need me to do this for you. That for them, the guys in our thing, when that truck broke down, every truck driver on base, everyone that drove a Hummer, everyone that drove a car, went over to our commander and said, I'm ready to go get them. I'm ready to go get them. We're just waiting for an Ishur. We're just waiting for an Ishur. I'll go in without the Ishur. I'll risk getting in trouble. Don't want anything to happen to them. And it's because of the soldiers, not the army, that I think that we're really winning the war. And that was something that I took away from it. The other thing is, and because it's the Shlav Bet program, and there were a lot of Haredim in it, I will say something about that. I know it's controversial and it opens another can of worms.
No, we're not going to get into the issue on this episode.
But people should know that there are Haredim and there are people that are in communities where the army is shunned and frowned upon that sacrifice everything to join the army and protect the country. There is one guy that did my training with me where he called his parents and in-laws over a week before he went, and he said, I just want to let you know this is what I'm going to be doing. Can you please help your daughter and daughter-in-law with the 3 kids over the next 2 weeks when I'm in training? And the response, both parents looked at each other and they both looked at him and said, we no longer have grandkids to help take care of.
No.
That was what was told to him. There's another guy in my unit who, in the beginning of the war, he lost all his business construction. All his workers were Arab. He just did MADA full time when the war started. He's a medic. He was in a crazy ambulance accident, with a breathing tube down his throat from trying to rescue people down south. And after that, he got out and he said, I still haven't done enough. So he joined Shlav Bet. And he's got a kid with severe disabilities that can only communicate. He's in a wheelchair, can only communicate with the little computer. And he did that. And another guy that lost his job because of it. And other people that told their families they're on business for 6 months in another country. And there are people that are really sacrificing it all to join the army. So, I like to say when people discuss the Haredi issue, I say there's Haredim and there's Haredim. And a lot of them, even the questions they ask, the religious questions about what they can and can't do, the same rabbis that are saying, don't go to the army, you can't go to the army, are giving them very army appropriate answers and putting the army before other things.
Interesting.
And people aren't talking about that because they can't talk about it. But I think that to a degree, I've heard this from a rabbi that's considered a gadol ador in maybe not the Haredi community, but they respect him and use his tshuvot. And I've heard it in a closed door thing, which, he said, you can't repeat, so I won't say his name. But he basically said there's no reason they don't go to the army and why they can't. And I think that there is a sense of that amongst some of the leaders, but unless they all get together and say it, the dominoes aren't going to fall. And everyone's afraid to be that person. But there are a lot of people in that community that want to and are willing. And not all. And don't get me wrong, it's still a minority. But I think that this is where I have some hope. Whatever this draft law comes out to be, but there is a wave of people that when they get out of yeshiva and they move to a community and they realize their community needs things and their people need things, that they say, okay, there are programs like Shlav Bet, I can do it. And they try. And I think you'll hopefully start seeing a little more and more. And these guys, they were worried about Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur on base. They found a way with Chabad to build a mikveh off-site and bring it to the base. And we're the first base that had a mikveh. And everyone on the base used it. And you know what? And the army bent over a little as well and gave them the room to do it. So I think there is a middle ground and something. But, again, I don't think politically, I think there's that line in the sand. But I think there's more people than we know that want to cross it.
I hear that. That's great. So I want to shift focus a little bit now to after the army. There's a lot of times people do reserve duty for 2, 3 months, 4, 5 months, 6 months, back and forth again and again. They have a very hard time transitioning back into their civilian life for many reasons, both because they've changed, they're different, or something about what's important to them, their priorities in life have shifted, or the structure of the army is not the same as the structure at home. And if, again, a lot of times we come back to civilian life and we forget that the civilian life just continued. It wasn't like it wasn't like paused while we were away. Life continued. The norms we're used to at home, the way, the responsibilities that you had at home, whether that's taking out the garbage, doing the dishes, taking your kids to school in the morning. Every husband has their different responsibilities. Your wife or the family unit found solutions while you were away. And now you're coming back in and you think you're just going to pick up where you left off, but they kept going. So how has it been transitioning back into civilian life for you? Have you had any trouble with that you want to talk about? Is there anything you've noticed that's different about you now after those 3 months?
100%. There is, I've had this conversation with my wife, and it's a lot of challenges with it. First off, living with your spouse when you're not used to being home all the time. My wife and I since August haven't spent two Shabbos together. She happens to be in America now, but I think in 2 weeks will be the first time we're spending two weeks together. So given that, and that I'm not home every other week, there's a lot of stuff that she didn't want to do in Israel, with banking or whatever. She had to pick up the responsibility and do. Taking out the garbage, little things that I would always do, that she would never do. We kind of had our responsibilities. Like you said, she becomes both parents in that case.
Right.
And that's a challenge, on the household side. But in terms of me, I think things that are important to me or were important to me before the war are a lot less important for two reasons. I live in Modi'in, which is considered a more affluent neighborhood, and a lot of Americans and people that work American jobs, and we go out to eat and we do things. And when you're in the Army, there are people in the Army that have turned this Miluim into a career over the last 2 years because they don't have jobs and other things, so they decide to volunteer for the country and kind of get much more of a feel of Israel as opposed to where I live and the box that I lived in. So I think it taught me a lot about that in terms of my priorities, where the Army, you're kind of all on this even ground and you're just telling stories and sharing, and you realize things that were important to you, after a war really aren't so important. That's one. Definitely put more of a value on family after being away so long. People ask us, hey, do you want to go out and do this? And I'm like, no, I'm going to spend the day with the family instead. Whether it's making up for lost time or just, again, you kind of realize more of what you're missing when you don't have it. So that, and in terms of just life in general, I think the transition to work and transition to regular life, going from a situation where it's routine. Food's given to you at this time, and this time. You wear the same pants, shoes. Some days you have to wear an army top. Some days you can wear a black T-shirt, depending on what you're doing. But, it's like they talk about the people in tech, jeans and a black shirt. You don't have to think. In the Army, you have your schedule. You know your job. If you have a mission, you train for the mission. You do your mission. It's very task-oriented, very regimented. You come back to real life, and it's like, oh, maybe we should put a question mark, or should we put an exclamation point in the marketing thing? And you're like, who cares?
Exactly.
Like, it's not life or death. Like, yesterday someone was shooting at me, and I passed the tunnel that a terrorist could have come out of. And today our biggest decision is, like, do we like the photo of the person with the black hair or the blonde hair? Like, who cares? And trying to overcome that mentality, it has been very difficult. I found myself in the beginning taking on kind of like a whatever, just go with it mentality and not giving my all. But, that's changed. But you just it just doesn't matter. And you're seeing a lot of guys that were in the Army are calling up and trying to get back in. And they're having a much harder time adjusting. I could tell you off the top of my head, 10 guys that I speak to on a regular basis that literally found courses and different things from the Army to just stay in. And they just don't want to go back to work because they did a day or two and it just was meaningless. You're going from something with such purpose to something that's like, hey, I got to do it. And it's a real challenge. And I think again, we talk about after the war post stuff. I think, we talk about PTSD, but I think this is a different type of PTSD. I think there's definitely some, the Army does some stuff for it, but I think that there needs to be a lot more because it's not just a one-day thing. This is something that needs working on.
Ongoing for years.
Yeah, something that needs working on. And look, some people that were also in action, and your unit was in a lot more than I will ever know. But how do you go from really being in gunfights to sitting at a desk? It's a very hard thing.
I haven't figured it out yet.
Yes.
I thank God don't have a desk job, so I haven't figured it out yet. But as is customary on our show, our last question is that we ask you this: what gives you optimism? What gives you real drive for the future? What is it that helps you remember and think about that life in the future is going to be great for Am Yisrael, it's going to be great for your family, it's going to be great for Israel? And while you think about an answer, I'm going to say thank you to our partners here at the Jerusalem Media Group, and of course, our wonderful sponsors at BeThereIsrael.com, who provide live streaming video services for all your events and occasions and parties and whatnot here in Israel. So if when your audience or your friends or your family can't be here live, BeThereIsrael.com has you covered, providing live video streaming services. And as always, like, subscribe, and share this content if you want to keep seeing more. Aron, what provides you with optimism for the future?
So I'll go back to a day before the war in Modi'in when one of the ministers, the justice minister, lives there. Yariv Levin, I think.
Yariv Levin.
He lives around the corner from us. And 2 days before the war, there were protests outside his house about judicial reform. And 2 days later, we're in a war. And the level of unity in this country, it unfortunately took a war to bring it together, made you realize that there's a lot more in common than we have apart in differences. And we just have to stop the bickering and fighting, but we can come together as a country. And you see it from the Jews outside of Israel and the level of unity for Israel across the globe, and the influencers that fought for us, and the actors that fought against their own communities. That gives me hope, because at the end of the day, it makes me realize that despite all these differences, yes, we'll have some political disagreements and all that, but we can come together, and we will come together, and the country will go on, and we'll be stronger as a result. And I just think that sometimes we lose sight of it, and yes, politics gets involved, but at the end of the day, we'll always fight about something, because Jews like to fight and argue, and that's just how it is. But really, we're all much more common, and have more in common, and really everyone from this will be stronger, come together, and hopefully, through the next couple of years, help build a better country and learn from the mistakes. I'm sure there'll be more, but you could see a path forward, and you see where we thought we were in a big divide now can come together.
All right. So thank you, Aron Schoenfeld, the founder of Smiles for the Kids. We're going to put in show notes, we're going to put links to all your organization's message if you want to support the work that Aron's doing. And as always, I'm Yisrael Chai.